He stood alone, not on a battlefield, not in formation, but in accusation. An officer in the United States Army, a graduate of West Point, stripped of his commission, charged with conduct unbecoming, court-martialed, dismissed. His name, Henry Ossian Flipper, and the Army said he failed. But that wasn't the full story, because before the disgrace, there was a breakthrough, and before the accusation, there was isolation, and before the court-martial, there was history. Tonight, we open the file. Henry Ossian Flipper was born in 1856 in Thomasville, Georgia, born into slavery, but raised in the shadow of emancipation. The Civil War would end before he reached 10 years old. Freedom came early in his life, but equality did not. In 1873, at just 17 years old, Flipper was appointed to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Reconstruction was still fragile, the country was still divided, and West Point was not ready. He was the first black cadet the Academy had admitted, and he would be the only one for years.
West Point in the 1870s was not merely a school. It was a cultural institution, an elite pipeline into military leadership. Cadets lived together, trained together, disciplined together. Isolation was rare. But in Flipper's case, isolation became policy. He was systematically shunned by white cadets, not officially, but consistently. No roommate, no social inclusion, no fraternity. This was social exile within a federal institution.
He endured 4 years of silence, 4 years of cold shoulders in mess halls, 4 years of being treated as an anomaly. He was not allowed to fail, because failure would confirm prejudice, and success would threaten it.
We often imagine courage as dramatic, but sometimes courage is endurance. Imagine being 17, surrounded by hostility, with no allies, and knowing that if you collapse under pressure, it won't just be your name that falls. It will be every black student who might follow. The weight on Flipper was not personal. It was historical.
In 1877, Henry Ossian Flipper graduated from West Point, commissioned as a second lieutenant, the first black graduate in Academy history. He did not celebrate loudly. History rarely allows pioneers celebration. It allows them scrutiny. Flipper was assigned to the 10th Cavalry, one of the Buffalo Soldier regiments. Black enlisted men, white commanding officers, frontier deployment, harsh terrain, harsh prejudice.
The Buffalo Soldiers were stationed primarily in the American West. They built infrastructure, protected settlers, engaged in campaigns against Native American tribes. They operated in extreme conditions, limited resources, long patrols, little recognition. Their performance records were strong, but their promotions were limited. Racial hierarchy remained embedded in military structure.
Flipper distinguished himself in engineering and logistics. At Fort Sill, he supervised drainage construction, solved the long-standing sanitation problem, improved conditions for soldiers stationed there. His technical competence was visible. But competence does not erase suspicion.
There is a pattern in American history. When a black man excels in a white institution, the tolerance margin narrows. Excellence is accepted. Visibility is not. Flipper was no longer just present. He was competent. And that made him dangerous to the narrative of inferiority.
In 1881, at Fort Davis, Texas, Flipper was charged. The accusation: misappropriation of funds, conduct unbecoming an officer. The evidence was thin, the accounting discrepancy small, but the trial was not. He faced a military court, not a rumor, not a reprimand, a formal proceeding.
It is important to be precise here. Flipper was acquitted of the embezzlement charge. The court did not find him guilty of theft. However, he was convicted on the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer and gentleman. This was a broader and more subjective category. The conviction allowed the Army to remove him without affirming criminal theft. The distinction matters because legally he was not found guilty of stealing, yet he was dismissed.
Acquitted of theft, convicted of character, and dismissed from the Army. In 1882, his military career ended, not in combat, not in dishonor by proven crime, but under a cloud.
The phrase conduct unbecoming is elastic. It can protect standards, or it can conceal bias. When institutions feel threatened, they often reach for procedural language. It sounds neutral, but its application is not always neutral. Flipper's dismissal sent a message. There are ceilings you may not see, but you will feel.
After his dismissal, Flipper did not disappear. He worked as a civil engineer, a translator, an author, a consultant on Latin American infrastructure. He wrote memoirs. He continued to build. But his military record remained stained. His name associated with dismissal, not pioneering graduation.
For decades, efforts were made to revisit the case. Historians and advocates reviewed transcripts, examined the evidence. The legal findings remained complicated, but the broader context of racial discrimination became undeniable. The question shifted from, was he technically guilty of an administrative error? Was he treated equitably? That question echoed into the 20th century.
In 1976, the Army formally reviewed his case. His discharge was changed from dishonorable to honorable. But that was not the final chapter. In 1999, President Bill Clinton issued a full pardon, 117 years after his dismissal. A delayed correction, a symbolic restoration.
A pardon does not rewrite the years. It does not return lost opportunity. It does not restore time, but it acknowledges injustice. And acknowledgement matters. Because history is not only what happened, it is what we choose to correct.
To understand what happened to Henry Ossian Flipper, you must understand the Army he walked into. Reconstruction was technically law, but resentment was culture. The Civil War had ended, but white Southern power structures had not disappeared. They had reorganized. West Point was not just a school. It was a gatekeeper, a pipeline into federal authority, a symbol of national power, and power protects itself. Flipper was not just a cadet. He was a disruption.
The Army in the 1870s was rebuilding, but it was also preserving hierarchy. Black enlisted soldiers were accepted in segregated regiments. Black officers were different. An officer commands authority. An officer gives orders to white men. That distinction mattered. That tension was not theoretical. It was structural. The presence of a black officer challenged assumptions that had been embedded for generations.
Imagine the pressure on Flipper. He was not just a lieutenant. He was a symbol. If he failed, it confirmed bias. If he succeeded, it unsettled tradition. That is not neutral pressure. That is psychological warfare inside a uniform.
Henry Ossian Flipper was not perfect. No pioneer is. But he was first. First to break a barrier at West Point. First to carry the burden of representation inside the Army's most prestigious institution. He endured isolation. He survived scrutiny. He was dismissed under contested circumstances. And he was vindicated long after he was gone. The record shows a graduate, an officer, an engineer, a man tested beyond ordinary measure. Headlines once framed him as disgraced. The archive tells a more complex story. And complexity does not weaken legacy. It strengthens it. Because true history is not clean. It is contested, corrected, re-examined. Henry Ossian Flipper stood alone in accusation. But he does not stand alone in memory. History remembers noise. The ledger records truth.